this is maybe the worst time to like try to become a professional audio engineer in the 130 years of recorded music, right?
That's Chicago-based recording engineer and mixer Nick Broste. Today, he and I are going to get into some of the challenges of the job of engineering in 2024 and how to overcome them. Everything from defining your role and negotiating deals to the fun stuff like picking studios and selecting microphones. We talk about the one big thing every engineer wants to know, which is how to stay busy.
Just get to know as many people without expecting them to hire you.
The mindset that feels supportive to the music community but is actually hurting us.
They see it as, and this isn't a bad thing, they see recording people at a very low price is like a service of theirs that they're giving to the music. They're like, I love this. You guys like don't make a lot of money doing what you're doing. I'd love to record you guys. I'll do it for like this insanely low price.
And to always remember that capturing the emotion is the true purpose of the recording process.
And the take is just this beautiful thing, and you get the thing here in the back of the neck and like around the edge of tears. Like if I can get that out of somebody and then feel it again while I'm mixing and then have someone else feel that when it comes out of the speakers, like that's success to me.
So if you're running a studio or freelancing, working with indie artists, whatever, you're not going to want to miss this one. This is real world studio advice. So stick around for my interview with Nick Broste. A lot of times engineers are hired by bands and artists who are self-producing. And I think that really kind of changes the role and responsibilities of an engineer. And I'm guessing you've probably been in that situation. I've done it a bunch. So what's your process like when you're getting ready for a session that doesn't involve like a third-party official producer?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the first thing that really needs to happen in that case is maybe the defining of certain roles, or just like learning where the boundaries are for like creative input and stuff like that. Because sometimes I work with an artist and they just want me to engineer, you know, and almost never comment on the music, even though I tell them I will, you know, but only in the service of helping them, never to, you know, wrest power from the artist or anything like that.
Right.
But, you know, talking about things like that, it's like, okay, you have a solid idea, you tell me what your ideas are, and I'll technically try to make them work for you, you know, do my best in that way. And, you know, that's usually a conversation with the artist that maybe they actually do need you to kind of help produce the record with them. But it's really about defining expectations for the two of you, you know, talking about how you should get paid, how you like to work, how they like to work, as opposed to just showing up to a room and there's a band there, you know. Then obviously, so it's like expectations, like what kind of input do you want? What kind of input do you not want? You know, like who kind of has like the final word on things, which is pretty much the artist all the time for me.
Right.
And then talking about budgets, how to do it, how we want to do it, how it should sound. And that's when I'll start thinking about spaces, like should we do it in a cabin? Should we rent a church for a day or two? Should we use any one of the dozens of great studios here in town that all sound different and have different stuff in them and different gear and at different price points? Sometimes people have a budget actually thought out ahead of time. They're like, I have this much money set aside.
So rare.
To make a record. It's so rare. And I just wish people would, hey, this is my budget. Can we make a record for this much money? Instead of like, can you tell me how much it is? And then people get a little freaked out, usually. You know, and sometimes the production part of it comes out along the process. Like I recently was working with a band and I ended up doing a lot of work on the side when they weren't around and really choosing where we went and even adding some parts and stuff like that. And about like 3/4 of the way through the process, they're like, oh, we're producing this record together. You know, and I don't take points or anything like that. There's no point with most indie artists.
It is true. It's true.
But yeah, it's like the budget, where to do it, and then like I just look at it as even if it's not stated, I will still probably act in the same way where I will do everything possible to try to get that dream, that oral dream out of somebody's head into a format that other people can hear it and experience if not exactly the same thing, as close as we can get to the same feeling.
Yeah.
And then kind of work with them to find any means necessary to get there.
Can we go back to the budget thing? Because I feel like it's a conversation that comes up all the time, right? You get like blind Instagram messages or website emails or whatever, where people, they don't have a budget expectation. And so even if they don't have enough money to work with said engineer or book some studio, if they don't know what their budget is, that person can't even help them. You know what I mean? Because I would gladly help an artist if they can't afford me. I'd be like, this isn't going to work. I'm not a good fit for you, but here's 4 people that are a good fit. And I feel like a lot of artists should just really have that conversation before they contact anybody, producer, mixer, mastering. Because I'm sure you would do the same. You would probably help people out like, well, yeah, call this guy. He would crush it for you and he's in your budget.
Yeah, that happens. And I think the main time that happens to me, I'm living in Chicago right now, and the city has this beautiful program called the D-Case grants, which are given out to artists every year. And I can't remember how many there are, but every time, a couple weeks before they're all due, I get a lot of people asking me to give them an estimate to put on their grant application. But other than that, it's like some people may know how much the studios cost per day, usually not.
Yeah.
But usually the first contact is to figure out how much it is for me to do something.
Yeah.
And they haven't really thought about it, so they're just pricing it. And so it's really easy to like have them be, I mean, I'm not exorbitantly expensive by any measure, but like it's really easy to scare them off and this is an interesting thing because it's like, strangely, many artists aren't really willing or don't know that they can negotiate.
Yeah.
Or ask questions, like if I quote somebody a certain dollar amount a day, and I'll usually say it like, my normal book rate is this, but I'm happy to discuss it further. And sometimes they'll be like, oh God, no. And just disappear. And sometimes they'll be like, well, yeah, I mean, what would you think if we did this? And then we can have that conversation and really make it work for them. This is something I wish I could teach more and more musicians to negotiate, not just for making records, but for their musical lives. It's like a huge thing, You ask for what you want, and the worst that can happen is somebody says no. But if you don't ask, you don't get.
Totally.
And it's the same on both sides. I ask for the rate I want. Some people I know can't afford it, so I'll just immediately be like, this is what I would normally charge. Can you do anywhere around this other range?
Yeah.
But it's something that bands and artists really need to at least have an idea of a ballpark of how much it takes to get some work done. Because you can do it pretty cheap.
You can get it done.
Depending on what the project is.
Yeah. You're right. There is a push and pull. And the more you're willing to communicate, both sides are willing to communicate, there can be a sacrifice made on either side. Be like, okay, I want to work for 12 hours. Well, you don't have enough money to work for 12 hours. We're going to work for 8. Or I don't need an instrumental mix or a vocal up mix. I don't need these extra things. Can it be cheaper? Or I only want 2 revisions. There's things that can go both ways. And if you have an open conversation and you understand what the needs of a project are, what the needs of a service provider, for lack of a better term, are, then you can probably find something that works if both people want to work together.
Absolutely. And I mean, that's the biggest thing. Most of the artists that contact me, I totally want to work with them, And I'm like, yes, I would love to make a record with them. And sometimes I do reach out even, and I'm like, hey, I've been seeing you play out for several years now, and I would love to work with you someday. Like, what are you doing this summer? Like, maybe we can book a date and lay down some of your new songs. And oftentimes they'll be like, I have no money. And I'll be like, that's cool. Can we talk about that?
Yeah.
Let's find a way to get you some money.
That's a whole other, like, to be able to bring value on top of, just engineering something or mixing something, like to give advice and help an artist get to a point where they can work with you or work with the person that they want to work with is, something that doesn't happen because things are so transactional sometimes.
Yeah, that's of course the grossest part of what we do. And I wish I had somebody handling that for me so I never had to talk about anything with dollar signs besides like who's picking up the coffee or the food today.
Right.
It is the hardest part of talking to people because, I mean, most artists don't have very much money because it's hard to get paid for them these days,
And even if you are getting paid, it takes, 6-9 months for those royalties to actually roll into your account. So even if your release is huge, you're not making any money for 6 months.
If you haven't advanced, then you're behind on those too, because you don't even get those royalties till.
Yeah, don't even want to get into labels. Yeah.
No.
Okay, so you kind of mentioned this earlier that you were like adding parts to something and working on something on the side. When you do kind of slip into a kind of a producer-ish role, how do you navigate that? Is it really like you're looking at your rapport with that artist and being like, I think I could add something here, and you bring it up? Or how do you approach that when you start to step into that role?
I will usually bring it up. I'll be inspired if we're listening to something together, or if I'm doing a bunch of editing before we like finish the final arrangement.
Yeah.
And I'm just like comping things or whatever. And if I have an idea, I'll just lay it down and send it in an alternate version sometimes. But if they're with me, I'll be like, what, and I'm not like adding, every once in a while, it'll be something like a lead or something like that. But pretty rarely, usually I'll just be like, what about if we thicken this up with some pads or something? And we'll have that conversation usually in the room together. And unless it's something that's like totally the hook of the song, I'm just happy to be credited. I'm not trying to get like a writing credit or anything like that. Although that is an alternate option if people want to, if people don't have as much of a budget, they can put me as a split on a song, but that's a fuzzy zone to live in. And I made a really bad mistake actually early in my career when I was mostly a player, playing a lot of sessions, and I was doing arranging, and I was in my 20s, and there was a producer doing this session, and he had just started hiring me. I've done about 3 projects for him at this point. And he called me and asked me to do an arrangement, went down to the studio, we like listened to it. They told me what they wanted, and I was like, okay, well, this is, a huge part of the song, what I'm writing. And so when I came back to the session when we were tracking, and I said, guys, what would you think about giving me a songwriter credit on this? And the artist and the producer just like looked at me with such an incredulous look that I felt like my whole body felt like ice inside. And I was like, oh, that was the wrong thing to say. Because I kind of was cocky and almost, I didn't really demand it, but I was definitely like stepping way out of the boundary. So I found the boundary that day. And since that point, I mean, I learned that lesson, thankfully. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't be doing what I do today. But yeah, I learned that lesson very early. And it's a slippery slope sometimes. People, I know on bigger sessions, writing sessions, I know you did a lot of writing sessions and stuff like that for a long time.
Yeah.
I know that stuff comes up all the time, but I don't really consider myself a writer. If I change one lyric, it's all just for the song.
Right. Right.
If I'm like writing a chorus, sure.
It's a different thing. And the player thing is actually really interesting, especially if you think about like popular music. Like if you're a bass player that gets hired to come in to play on like an R&B or a pop track or make a loop for the hook of a hip hop track, bass is playing a huge role in that track. So at what point, when it's the only thing playing under the rapper or under the vocal for half the song, at what point do you deserve, songwriting?
Yeah.
But at the same time, you think about like classic, session guitarists who played iconic guitar solos that we all know and can sing. They don't have songwriting.
No.
They got paid for that session.
Does James Jamerson have any credits for his amazing bass playing?
No. And he's like defined that style.
Yeah, absolutely. Or like Pino Palladino on D'Angelo's Voodoo.
Yeah.
Those bass lines are, a huge part of that record. But like, I don't know. I'd have to go look, but he probably didn't get a writing credit.
I strongly doubt it. But it's interesting if you think about the way music, especially the way music's made now, and you can grab something from a writing session. And
yeah, I feel like it's probably a little less poisonous now after listening to lots of. You ever listen to A History of Rock Music in 500 Songs?
No.
That podcast?
No.
It is incredible. It's very in depth. And I think he's 170, 180 episodes in, and I've completely caught up to all of them. But like a lot of what he talks about is the legal and like the mob and stealing people's credits and then like putting out a song but changing one word and just like all of the like intellectual property, like basically theft. And that happened, right up pretty much until today.
Yeah.
But like before the 80s, just insane what would go on all the time.
Yeah.
So I feel like it's maybe a little healthier environment where people might talk about it more today.
Yeah, it's definitely, I think a lot of people are just afraid of it too. I did a session with an artist who wrote a song, we were all in the room, we didn't listen to any music, and she ultimately never wanted to release it because it was really reminiscent of something else, once she listened to it a few weeks later, and felt uncomfortable putting it out because people would accuse her of stealing it. And it's like, we all listen, we're all music fans, like we all love stuff, like it's going to come out in us. So it's not like you're not always stealing something on purpose, but it happens on accident. But
yeah.
So you talked about when you were a player, and I know is it a trombone player?
Yes. Yeah.
So I'm guessing that you're probably, we'll go back to engineering here, particular on how you mic brass. Are you a big, do you get to record a lot of brass and horns?
Kind of particular. It depends on there's so many ways to do it.
Right.
And this is a question that gets asked to me like a lot. Like, well, how do you mic up horns? And I'm like, well, how many are there? What's the song? What room are we in? Are you guys gonna kill it all together so I can just use a stereo pair? Or really depends. For myself, I'm very particular because I know the way the sound projects out of my horn. There's like 2 mics I really like to use. One I don't own, but the other one I do. So I'm particular about that because if I get it wrong and like live sound people think I'm crazy, and I'm like, no, this is how it should be. And they're like, but no, I'm like, no, trust me.
Yeah.
For my own sound, because if I put it in a spot where people would normally put it, it gets kind of airy sounding. So I found this thing, but it really depends on the player and how they're playing. Some people move a lot when they're playing. I've been doing a lot of live recording this year too. And some people's sound is just completely different. But in general, for like brass, like generally ribbons.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or condenser mics, it doesn't really matter. As long as it sounds like the horn and not too close.
Yeah.
There's a whole history of especially trombonists playing with like the bell like this.
Oh, like inside, right.
Like very close. And it's like, it starts to sound like a French horn and they play very quietly.
Yeah.
And that doesn't really appeal to me. But yeah, there's lots of ways to do it, but a lot of it has to do with the song and how the parts are fitting in there. If it's a jazz quintet with horns, that's going to be way different than like a rock song with a horn section.
Right.
The features are going to be different. The saxophone, though, that's a very particular one because the sound doesn't come straight out of it. Mm-mm. It radiates in all kinds of directions and a lot of it off to the right. So that really depends on the instrument and the person's tone. The harsher it is, the darker the rhythm I'm going to use on a saxophonist. And the warmer it is, the more tubey condenser I'm going to get,
Yeah. You mentioned French horn. Are you like an over-the-top French horn micer? So you're miking the back, or are you miking the horn?
Sometimes I'll put them close to the wall.
Oh, like right.
And then like point it at them.
Yes.
Because I think the point of the French horn is to not have it be totally in your face.
Yeah. Yeah. That was a thing we did at Capitol all the time whenever there was French horns for usually like a scoring date.
Like in an orchestra, yeah.
Yeah, we would put something hard behind them and then you mic them above. That was one of the first times I was in a studio and I looked at it and I was like, the fuck is going on here?
Doesn't seem to make sense, but in the end it does. If you go to enough orchestra concerts, you'll see it.
Yeah, totally. And then what about, so sax, you were saying comes out the player, right?
Yes. Some of it comes out of the bell, but most of the sound only comes out of the bell when all the keys are pushed down.
Right.
And the sound is escaping out of the keys. Same with flute, like any woodwinds, like bassoon, all that stuff. So it projects different frequencies come out the sides. So it's really hard to mic like a bass saxophone with one microphone. And I have a few friends that have bass saxophones in town. You can do it, but like if there's other people in it, who's in the room? Is the drummer in the room too? Which is a very common thing with me. Very common. Like I can't put the mic 5 feet away from the sax to get the full huge sound of it. It's got to be close, maybe 2 mics. It really depends on the player, how they move, how tall they are, and what else is in the room. The big thing is what else is in the room.
Yeah, what can you get away with, basically?
Getting the bleed control or moving them closer to the drums so that the delay is less or stuff like that.
Well, let's keep going down that road, because I was going to ask you about just mic selection in general, right? Because I started out as a kid at Capitol. We had 16 U67s.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just ridiculous. Like, what do you want to mic your orchestra with? U67s. So then when I get out in the world, you start recording indie bands, like you're going to all the smaller studios in town. I had a really hard time because I was coming from this like mic locker that's unrealistic into the real world. And so I always felt like I was making compromises, picking what mic should go on what. And then when you think about what's in the room and you're like, well, I would love for this to be figure 8, but I also really need to use this microphone over here. So band in the room, tracking date with like 3-4 people. What are you thinking when you're doing mic selection?
Well, the first thing is where they're all going to be in the room. Like if there's booths, who's going to be in the booth? Like this, I have a perfect example coming up that we're doing at Electrical Audio. RIP Steve as well, and big love to all the Electrical Audio guys. It was a huge loss, but I'm going to be there soon, and it's a band with kind of a normal rhythm section instruments, and then 2 people playing flute / saxophone. And this particular room at Electrical is very tall and very reverberant. And so how do we want the drums to sound? You set the drums up in there, they're going to sound big no matter what, but the horns will be isolated. Or are we going to put the drums and the amps in the other room? Like there's all these different sound possibilities. And basically once I figure out where everybody can be to where they can see each other and communicate, which is also very important. They need to feel like they are playing together and somebody's not like, over here like this, like just staring off at a wall or hidden behind a baffle. I'll figure that out. And that arrangement will also, I'll be trying to take the acoustics into my, like often I have to record piano in the same room as the drums. In that case, I slide the piano up as close as I can possibly get to the drums and put as many baffles between them as I can, so that the bleed is shorter, so it doesn't make the drums sound forever away.
Right.
But microphone wise, I mean, that's a great use for figure 8 mics. Figure 8 mics, you can set up. If I had to set up these 2 flute players next to the drums, I would probably put them 1 on each side with a figure 8 coming down like this with the null point pointed at the drums. Maybe they're angled a little bit. I'll pick up some bleed in the room, sure. But for the most part, I'm going to get like a clean signal that I can turn up and down without making the drums sound forever away.
Yeah.
And some mics, this is another big thing, like knowing the patterns and how they sound and how they actually pick up sound. This is a big thing that I think a lot of younger people are like, oh, Omni, it picks up everything, or like cardioid. Well, that's, you get a lot of separation from the back or whatever, but it also like it warps the sound of the microphone too. Like, like Al Schmidt using a lot of Omni mics. It's just very natural tone. You don't get all this weird frequency twisting from the back and stuff like that.
Yep.
And that's also the advantage of really nice small diaphragm condensers as well, like Schoeps, some of the Sennheisers, Neumanns and stuff like that people use in orchestral recording, that bleed coming in from the sides, which is kind of the most important thing. So when I'm thinking about that for a band, I mean, I'll have a couple mic options in mind if they're available at the studio, because most of the studios I work with have a pretty good selection. But getting started, it's like back when I just had like a AKG Perception 110, a 57, and an M box.
Yeah.
You do what you can.
Yeah.
By any means necessary, you mess with stuff. Use 57 above the kit and a the perception, in front of the bass drum. But really the patterns and how they interact is a real big thing. If you can get away with using Omni mics in different places, you're going to get this beautiful natural tone. If you got like isolation, putting a mic in Omni up against a upright bass or close to it, it's going to give you certain advantages. You get really nice low end, but even different microphones like a Shep's Omni mic functions differently than like, say, a U67 in Omni, because it's just one capsule. And the same in figure 8 too. Like a ribbons figure 8 will be much tighter just because there's physically no way for the ribbon to move this way than a 67 in figure 8 as well too. So you get more isolation.
Yeah.
And this comes up a lot if you're having a guitarist who's singing at the same time. And you get a couple 44s or just whatever, like Cascade Fatheads, whatever you can find, any mic, and make these like little flippy patterns to give yourself some isolation. And it's we actually did this with two 67s, tried that, or 67 and a C12, and then we did it with two 44s. And the 44, even though it took a lot more gain, like the isolation was easily twice as much.
Yeah.
And that just comes from like years of playing around with microphones and thinking about how they interact in space. But once you learn how to do that and what does what and what sounds good on things, I mean, if you don't have any money, this is a good reason to try to go to a studio and try stuff out,
Yeah, totally.
And I mean, opposite of your story, one of the first studios I started working out of, I wasn't an employee, but they were the first place I went to that had 87s. They had like RCA ribbons. They had some really cool mics. I didn't use the U87s for the first year and a half that I worked there because I was actually afraid of liking them. I was like, yeah, I'm not going to mess with those. I don't want to like find out that they're amazing because I can't afford them.
But then you didn't like them anyway. Do you like 87s?
I mean, they work for what they're a good mic.
They have
if you use them.
Purpose. Yeah,
they have their purpose.
Yeah.
Like I wouldn't mind owning a pair here. That would be great. But I was like, I'm not going to fall in love with a $3,000 microphone. I just can't.
Yeah, it's not an option. Not an option.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to go back to the figure 8 on guitar and vocal, because I feel like the first time I saw and heard that, I was like, oh my God, that's how it's done. And I feel like so many people always really fight with that, but it is crazy to hear that if you get that null point right at the vocal, and then you can get that, whatever you want to use for the vocal to be very close to it, and you kind of have this like big thing right in front of you. It is night and day, the separation that you have between those instruments in comparison to when you just, so many people put an SM7 on the vocal and then like a 451 or Shure 81 on the acoustic guitar. It is like a whole different phase experience. You're just like, oh wow, this I can use both of these as much as I want. So everybody should experiment with that. Yeah,
you can pan them in stereo you want.
Yeah.
It's a great thing, especially if you find like a stereo ribbon, which can get a little weird this way.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's incredible. And that's that pattern thing. Like even if you use two 414s in figure 8, you can get pretty close to that, but it's not like the ribbon, because the ribbon will literally not move to the side or up and down.
I never thought about the physical limitations of the ribbon. That's
it
actually
can't go anywhere.
Yeah, that's true. That's really true.
Unless it's broken.
Yeah.
So, and you'll get more bleed in the back, but that can be nice sometimes. So.
Yeah. If you're in a nice space, you get a little air. I did. There's an interview for listeners. I'll put it in the show notes, but I had a conversation with Derek Barguer from Vanguard. Have you used any of his mics?
Oh yeah, I'm about to do a session where they've got a bunch of those mics. Yeah,
yeah, making great stuff. But he spent a lot of time talking about well, if you can only afford one microphone, it's going to sound different. Like if it's too bright here, then sing a little bit off to the side, and it's going to be a different tone. And he's like, don't buy 10 microphones if you can't afford it. Just figure out all the things that your one microphone can do. And understanding polar patterns and understanding how microphones pick up as you go off to the side and stuff like that it's understanding all your tools,
So here's an example. One of the younger musicians I know here in town, we were talking one night, and he said, man, I bought this Neumann Cam like 184, the cardioid one, I think. And he's like, it's just I've been using it on my acoustic guitar, but it's just so bright. It's unbelievably bright. And I was like, yeah, man, it's a mic designed to be like put 9 feet above an instrumentalist. It's not meant to be like a amazing close mic. It's meant for being like further away. I was like, just back it up a couple feet, or don't point it right at the instrument, or like just find the spot. And he messaged me back a couple days later. He's like, thank you so much. I was about to sell this thing, and I was like, yeah, you just like, if you want less high end, just put it further away. I don't know.
Yeah. I always think of that as a dark microphone as well, or at least the 84 is the original. So I always think of it as a warmer, darker. Along the lines of what we're talking about, your work as an engineer, producer, mixer feels very like natural and organic, but also like vibey and analog. And I think a little bit of this answer we've kind of touched on, but do you have any tips for actively going after that sound if you're a young engineer? Because I feel like when you're working with bands, what you're doing is what so many bands want. Not like a solo pop artist, but you have a sound that I think fits a lot of really cool music.
Cool. I mean, thank you.
Yeah, sonic tips for an engineer that's trying to get that organic sound.
Yeah, I think what I just said is actually maybe the way to think about it. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with like beating stuff up and doing cool things to stuff, but a lot of it is just capturing the sound the musician's making. And a lot of the worlds I work in, especially with people that work more in like the jazz, improvised, like creative improvisation world, those people are working on the sounds that they want to play with all the time. They know what they want it to sound like. So I'm just like, I've got a great source. I'm just trying not to mess it up and make sure, like capture it in a nice way. And a lot of that is just like, I think a lot of it comes from being a, there's a lot of, seems like a lot of engineers who used to be trombonists. Like I keep running into more and more people that like played the trombone through high school, maybe even college and stuff like that, and then gave it up and started engineering. I mean, I still play, but you have to put yourself in an environment where you're hearing that kind of music live. Like I've been lucky enough to sit in the middle of a bunch of bands where I'm listening deeply to everything. So I know that feeling of playing in a big band or playing on stage with a rock band or whatever. And I've, mixed a lot of live shows. So a lot of that is just having the image in your mind, being in the room while they're playing together, if they are all in the same room, and if they're interacting well, like really listening to what's going on in the room and listening to their sounds and just trying to bring that all together without like really messing with stuff, besides like maybe getting rid of problems.
Yeah, right.
But keeping it pretty simple.
Yeah, would you say that maybe a mistake that a lot of people make is trying to validate their presence by doing something instead of just capturing?
That happens.
Like, oh, look at this compressor. I've never used this. I'm going to use it.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, sometimes that can be cool.
Yeah.
It's like, true. I mean, there really is no rule. Like some records that I've worked on, like they shouldn't sound like a photorealistic version of the band. Like the band wants it to have like more crunch or power or whatever and sound more like a punk rock record with horns or something, like.
Yeah.
But usually they'll say that. But yeah, I on sessions like that where I'm trying to keep it like with how the band sounds and how I've heard them sound. Yeah, I'm like less likely to, plug in like an H3000 and, get the chorus echo going. And like, I mean, sometimes I will, because sometimes drummers like playing with it. But yeah, I'm not trying to like change their sound.
Right.
Unless they ask for something like that, in which case I usually will give them something to play with as they're playing.
Yeah.
But I mean, I usually save sessions for trying stuff out. Sometimes I'll just mult a channel and record it flat and then record it with like, oh, what's this do?
Yeah.
And get like really saucy.
Which I think is the advantage of trying to work in a studio where you have a console or you have the ability to do that, because you could also get creative. Like you said, you could do a kick snare overhead thing through the tape echo and print that to a track, and it exists. They don't need to use it. They don't need to hear it.
Yeah.
But it's an option for creativity later. I wanted to ask you, because you mentioned you do a lot of experimental jazz instrumental stuff. And I would imagine that those sessions, not breaking the flow is super important, because once those people get into their headspace that they want to be in, they don't want to stop. They don't want to have a technical problem. What are some of your preparation tips to not break the creative flow once things are happening?
Yeah, that's very important. I have some artists I work with, if it's in the studio, they just want me to hit record and not stop. Like keep it going no matter what, especially if it's like an all improvised session.
Yeah.
Sometimes they'll talk for 10, 20 minutes between a take, and I'm just ready to go. Like, and sometimes if I'm like, okay, these guys are going to talk forever, I will pause for a second. But I also like, I mostly record in Pro Tools, and I almost always will set up the playback so it'll take off from wherever the playhead stopped. That is a huge thing. Because like, even if Pro Tools crashes, at least it'll start right at the end point that it crashed, and I can just hit record again.
Yeah. Because
that will happen seemingly once every session, where Pro Tools will be like,
yeah,
in the middle of a take. Mostly not on my laptop, strangely. Like, it hasn't happened to me on a live recording for 4 years. Knocking on wood there. But like, that's a big thing. And then you have to get the sound that you're going to go with before they start tracking.
Yeah.
That's a huge thing. So prep wise, you want to know, for me, if I'm working in a room that I've worked in before, I was like, I pretty much know where everybody's going to go. I want to get there 2 hours before they walk in the door. And even if I don't know exactly what mics I'm going to use, I'm going to have stuff up on stands. Lines are going to be run. And this is all me. I usually don't have help. But that way they can get in there and get their instruments tuned, and I'm changing things while they're setting up, instead of all of us setting up at the same time and being like, oh, sorry guys, like I just noticed the snare mic is going shh. But you just let them roll, and like I try not to, on many of those sessions, sometimes I'll be like, no, this is like that, or give them, I will only really speak up if there's something that is like holding them back, or they have a question. It's like, well, what about if we do this? Or like, was that cool? And maybe I'll pipe in, but I usually just let them go.
Yeah.
In fact, those are some of my favorite sessions, because it's really all about the first 2-3 hours of me being there. And after that, it's all about them, like getting the lighting right, if you can.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like having snacks around, all of those things. Like, a huge proponent of keeping your blood sugar at a decent level. Huge proponent of that.
Not too high, not too low.
Yes. Too many people get hangry or start to lose their mind when they haven't had enough food.
Yeah.
But it's pretty simple. I usually know all the musicians for the most part too. So it's like, we hang a little bit. There's lots of breaks, but a lot of those records get made, the vast majority, in like 6-7 hours.
Yeah. That's cool.
They just come in and lay it down. I make roughs of everything. And I'm not trying to change things from song to song. I'm not like, okay, here comes a slap on the delay. Like, it's just keeping it really simple. And then also making sure you're set up in a way to where Pro Tools is less prone to crash. And like, having like a hard drive that is fast and has plenty of room on it. And not using any plugins while you're tracking too. For that kind of stuff. If I'm literally rolling for 6 straight hours, like, nothing can mess with it if at all possible, because it happens. I did a record recently where they did like 2 days, and they were basically doing one take of each composition that they had. There's a lot of material, and in one of the takes, Pro Tools was like, boop, and I started going again. And in this case, I was like, I can't interrupt them, because like, they're on fire right now.
Yeah.
Like, they're killing. And Oh, I can't believe I just said that. All the jazz people say that way too much. Killing. It's so violent. But at the end of that take, I said, guys, I had a little dropout, but I noted it. And then as soon as it happened, I was listening for like, how can I edit this back together in a way that makes sense? We lost about like 8 seconds of music. And then the artist was like, hey, thanks for telling me. I'm glad you let us keep going. You know, you got to be ready for somebody to be mad at you too. Even if it's not your fault.
Yeah.
You know, but you got to admit it.
Totally.
It's like, hey guys, this happened. I'm really sorry. Do you want to redo the tune? Do you want me to try to figure out an edit? And the artist was like, very clear. He's like, he's like, that's disappointing, but let's work on it right now. Just try to keep them in the flow, even though everybody else had to take a break for like 10 minutes while I did a crazy edit. But yeah, just keeps things really simple for them and stay out of the way.
Yeah. Do you find that do you ever record like just empty tracks in case you need to add something midway? You know, just have, because, you know, once Pro Tools is rolling, you can't add a track. So do you ever find yourself going that far in prep?
That is one of the most frustrating things about DAWs is like, I wish I could record a track while we're rolling.
Yeah.
Like on a tape machine.
Yeah.
That would be amazing because I usually do have open tracks. I usually will have like 1 or maybe 2 in case I need to quick patch something in the middle of a take.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I just, if I didn't use it, I just delete that audio file after the take.
Yeah.
You know, if it's just blank. So yes, stuff like that, backups. When I do live stuff, I have to have a redundant recorder.
Multi-track or stereo?
Multi-track. So I used to do just stereo, but there was a problem with like, I used to use a Zoom H6 just for the stereo.
Mm-hmm.
But for some reason, it would always stretch the time somehow. I think the clocks in those things are all messed up. But like it would never line up. Like it would stretch as like the recording went on.
Oh, weird.
Even if same bit and sample rate. But then I got this, I started using this little guy, this Sound Devices Mix Pre.
Yeah. As
like my backup because I can get 10 channels going on that. And for like a lot of the like live orchestral stuff I'm doing, I'm not going over 8 channels. So one of my interfaces has analog outs. And so I've at least got like those 2 recorders going.
Okay.
And then it's going digitally into that thing. But that's another big thing is having a backup. And sometimes in sessions I will run, I saw this on maybe it was that Lady Gaga documentary from a few years ago.
Okay.
That Mark Ronson always had a little Zoom recorder, like a dictation one. First of all, in the room for like ideas. I think it was constantly rolling.
Mm-hmm.
And then they also had something just recording a 2-track of all the sound coming through everything all at once. Yeah. So it was like a separate stereo mix that was just a backup of just like, oh, Pro Tools stopped, but we still have the audio from this so we can get something from it. So I used to do that a lot. Yeah. And I probably should get back into it a little bit, but
especially in those highly creative sessions. It was a couple months ago, I had Dana Nielsen on, and you and I were talking about him because you're drinking out of your Ember. Because we were talking about the Ember a lot. But everything he's ever done with Rick Rubin, there's always a second stereo rig with all the talkbacks piping in there. So it's like if somebody says something, plus the mix off the board, like it's all getting captured somewhere. Like worst case, you can find it, you know?
It's a lot to archive, but for stuff like that, you know, and how much money is being spent at those sessions.
Right.
And time and like, you know, it's hard to get a lot of those people together all at the same time.
Yeah. And just to remember the creative process, the example that he used is he was in a session and the singer had an idea, you know, between takes and the guitar player was playing. And then when they went to do it, the idea wasn't the same. It just didn't feel the same. So they went back and they listened to it and the guitar player was reharming under it. He wasn't playing the same thing. And all of a sudden it was like, oh shit, that's what it was. The guitar player is playing something different. So it's crazy, man, the things you encounter in the studio.
It's hard to pay attention to everything all at once. It is kind of our job.
Yeah.
But it's hard to do it with our brains. So
So I wanted to ask you the question that every up-and-coming engineer wants to ask anybody that works. Is there anything you do that you think keeps you busy? Is there anything you can tell somebody that just like doesn't understand why they're not working as much as they want to work?
I mean, I've been doing this now. I got a late start, to be honest. I didn't really start doing this till I was almost 30. You know, like I messed around a little bit, but I never tried to like really get in it until
Right.
around then.
Yeah.
And for me, I already knew hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of musicians and had like done a lot of touring. So I might have like a kind of a different viewpoint. And I also live in one of the, like Chicago's an incredible city for music in a wide variety. There's so much happening here
Yeah.
that nobody ever talks about, it feels like. The people that know me and tend to call me know that I'm very, very, very into quality and like into doing a good job and like as few compromises as possible. And hopefully that's my reputation amongst other people. And then I think I've been doing it long enough to where, you know, it's pretty much word of mouth for me. So it just takes time. Like I'm a nice guy. I'm not like a mean person. That's a huge thing.
That is true. It is
A
true.
lot of people are just like, I got this idea for your band and like, it's going to rule. And it's like, okay, that could be great. But it's a lot of it is just like how you deal with people and your skills. Obviously, if you're messing stuff up all the time and making things hard for people, like showing up late, having bad communication about money and about time and about expectations, and not having conversations that need to be had initially, you know, talking about all the details and all the heavy stuff. I think that's the a lot of people get burned that way, where they don't have the conversations of like, this is how much this is going to cost. I need you to pay me at this time of the process, stuff like that. But even if you're not there yet, you know, I think at this point, I know so many people that somebody's probably going to give me a call.
Yeah.
And if you just move somewhere, that's going to take some time. So, I mean, that's what I would really recommend is just get to know as many people without expecting them to hire you.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Having no or very low expectations for others, like to want to work with you, you know, like not just assuming that, why aren't they working with me? That's unhealthy and it will like lead you to disappointment. And then when people do ask you to help them, that's, you know, that's like a major plus and super awesome. Yeah. And just do as many things as you can. I still do live sound.
Yeah.
You know, I do some podcast editing for one organization that like really, it keeps me from having to do stuff I don't want to do. And allows me to charge what I charge. There's no shame in that. And if you really, I mean, this is maybe the worst time to like try to become a professional audio engineer in the 130 years of recorded music, right?
Might be true.
We don't have to go into that, but it's a deep theory I have. But just work hard, be a nice person, and just try to do your best work. Yeah, I don't know.
I resonate with all that. And I'm not going to let you not talk about your deep theory, by the way. We're going to come back to that. I do think that word of mouth is the best, but also the hardest way, because when you get jobs through word of mouth, they're basically done deals. You know, somebody's like, Nick is amazing. You need to call Nick for your next record. 90% that gig's yours, right? But you need to do enough gigs and meet enough people for that to happen. And you have to do great work for hundreds of people, because let's be honest, like as much as we think every gig we do, that person's going to recommend us. I mean, I would say 5% of the people I work with will recommend you to somebody else. Like the world does function as very like top of mind. You know, it's like if you're not top of mind at somebody with somebody when they're having coffee with their friend, they are not going to spit your name out, you know?
I also go out to a lot of shows.
Yeah, you got to be around. I need to be better at that, being around. Like I like to sit in my backyard.
It's hard. I mean, I'm 46. I don't want to be out 5 nights a week. I mean, there's so much cool stuff I do want to see. And much of my social life is around music. And it's a major part of it.
Yeah.
But it can be exhausting. But if you're in your 20s, yeah, go out.
Be out there.
Like, don't go broke going out.
Yeah.
But get out there and meet people and like and have fun while you can, you know. It's like, I mean, I'm single, I have very few responsibilities to other people, so I'm in a pretty particular position. But yeah, you got to get out there. and meet those people.
Make music friends. It's not, like you said, it's not about getting work from every person you meet. It might just be that you're friends with this bass player and they're friends with that drummer, and then that drummer tells a singer or songwriter that you should work with them. It's like it's not going to happen the way you think it's going to happen. So
yeah, you can't force it, and you can't, like I said again, like expectations are like the quickest road to disappointment.
Mm-hmm.
And and there's no shame in doing other work if on your way. Like you don't have to be 100%. I only do music engineering and stuff like that. It's pretty rare.
Yeah.
These days.
It's hard. It's hard.
If you don't have like external money coming at you. So
okay, so now you've got to give us your dark theories about whatever it is, the end of the audio industry or why it's a bad time to become a recording engineer. I got to hear it. I'm curious.
Okay. Well, the main thing, I think, and this all comes from a couple of business books I read a few years ago. Like if we think back to the 70s or even the 80s. So there was a barrier to entry, right? You had to have a recorder, which back in the 70s would have been a tape machine. How are you going to get sound out of the recorder? You had to have a mixer. You had to have all this infrastructure to make a record, right? And then getting like self-pressing your records was like something that was very rare. And the record labels were pretty picky, about what they were putting out, right? And like in general, what they put out would at least sell a little bit of actual material. All right. So like now the main problem is the artists aren't making any money.
Yeah.
The vast majority, but there's, 500 times the amount of recordings coming out now, which we won't even say anything about that. It's neither good or bad in my estimation, really. But so the artists aren't getting paid. And to my mind, there's no barrier to entry to be able to do this anymore. I mean, I just made a cool recording on my phone 3 days ago using Logic for the iPhone, or GarageBand, whatever. Yeah, you can do all kinds of cool stuff. And so there's no barriers to entry anymore. So everybody can do it. The problem is because everybody can do it, a lot of people will do it for nothing or for very, very, very cheap, And this happens to everybody that does this, but there are people who they see it as, and this isn't a bad thing, they see recording people at a very low price as something, is like a service of theirs that they're giving to the music. They're like, I love this. You guys don't make a lot of money doing what you're doing. I'd love to record you guys. I'll do it for this insanely low price, which is great as an idea. But then everything else goes down. So everybody's expectations go down. The musicians aren't getting paid. And everybody's flooded. And there's terrible advice. There's lots of audio work, I guess I would say. You can do there's tons of audio work. But in terms of strictly being a music engineer, be it recording or mixing, the tools are great and wonderful. But in terms of making a long living, just doing that,
yeah,
it's really, really hard. And it has been in the past, but it's hard to make it through a sea of all of the thousands and thousands and thousands of engineers that are coming out of schools,
Yeah.
with now pretty decent training.
And using the same tools that other people are using.
Exactly.
Like you said, the barrier to entry for tools is non-existent at this point. So
yeah, I mean, people complain about Pro Tools being $600-700 for a perpetual license, but that's not that much.
Yeah. If you're using it every day and you're working every day, yeah, I agree. I agree with you. It is. I think about I don't know. I have a couple thoughts. One, I think about this episode I did that. Mastering is Dead. I don't know if you saw that YouTube video.
Yeah.
Okay. So the point of that video, and if you're watching this interview and you didn't make it to the end of Mastering is Dead, by the way, I can tell by your comments, it's about the value that a human brings to the process. And, it's my problem for dropping that in the last 20 seconds of an 8-minute video. But I think that the more technology makes this job attainable to anybody, I think that's awesome, right? Because you're inspiring more people to be creative. But yeah, it's watering down and making it more difficult for people to make the living that they were making 10 years ago and going to make it even harder 10 years moving forward. But I think that's why people really need to hone in on the value that they bring. You're busy because of the things that you bring outside of pressing record, the preparation that you do, the way you interact with bands, the way you respect that when they're in the creative zone, they need to stay there, and you'll do everything you can to make sure that that's the way it is. That's why you're going to get hired, not because you know how to mic a saxophone. Although 10 years from now, you might be one of the last people that knows how to mic a saxophone.
Oh, this old thing.
Who knows how to play this? But so there's that thought. But then I think that the audio industry is preying on this. I mean, look at like the Behringer $300 33609. I mean, whatever. I haven't heard it. I'm not going to judge it. I guarantee you it's built like a piece of shit. Maybe it sounds great. It's only going to work for a year. Like at this point, when I buy something on Amazon, I just assume it's going to break in 6 months. But people know that, like, let's take the things, the computer is like, democratized everything, right? So what's left is the gear. Okay, so how do we, and no shade to these companies, but like, how do we make the Neve 1073 cheaper? Well, Behringer just did one. Warm Audio has been doing one for a long time. Let's take the last things that these people can't afford, and let's put it in their price range. And like I said, I haven't used a lot of this stuff, so I'm not directly knocking it, but I see the industry prey on the fact that everything is getting cheaper. And it bugs me a little bit when you look around at it. You're like, I don't know, we're fueling the fire, I guess. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And again, I'm not like totally dark on it. I'm just saying it's hard.
It's hard. It's hard.
Like, I love what I do, and I love what other people do. I love, I have a lot of friends that are engineers, and we hang out, and like, it's great, and I love nerding out with other people, and it's not really about that. It's just really hard for people to make a living.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I think like keeping your expectations, I mean, you can go for if you want to go for it.
Yeah.
But you got to keep that in mind. It's like, so I was doing some tape dumps for Numero Group one time, and I got this 1-inch 16 track from Minneapolis, and it actually had a brochure for the studio it was recorded in like 78, like the year after I was born. And I was like, oh my God, like, look at this. Oh, they have a at the time I had a Neotech. Like, oh, they have a Neotech. They got this tape machine. They had pretty much the same setup I did at my studio at the time, back when I had like a full-on studio. And I was like, this is incredible. I was like, looked at the rates, 1978, $350 a day. Okay. That's what I was charging in 2015, or no, 2018, except that $350 in 1978 is $1,200 today.
Wow.
And and I showed this to one of the artists I was working with. He's like, oh man. I was like, yeah, that's like true for all of us. It's like, live sound still pays $150 or whatever. Like,
yeah, it's super challenging. Yeah. And we could go on forever.
yes.
And
but the main thing is that artists need to get paid.
exactly.
Like
that's what I was going to say.
For what they do, you know, like if at all possible.
The artists need to get paid. That's what it comes down to. Like Spotify is really on everybody's shit list right now, but
that's who pays us, is the artist.
Yeah, exactly. Eventually people won't want to pay for engineering, and they won't want to pay for mastering because they're not making enough money, and they're pretty good at it. They're pretty good at recording and mixing their own record because they have great tools and great access to knowledge. So why? Right? And that's where it comes back to that X factor of like personality and value outside of technical skills. Anyway, I could rant on that for a while.
Yes, let's let the sun. We're going to close out on that into this.
Luckily, we're deep in the show, so anybody that's like this far, they're down, they're with us. This isn't at the beginning where they're like, man, these guys are crazy.
They're in their little basement bunkers like me, like, yeah, that's right, guys.
That's right. Okay, so you've listened to the show. You know I've got two questions that I close everything out with, so I'll hit you with the first one. Was there ever a time in your career that you chose to redefine what success meant to you?
Yeah, I think that I hadn't thought about that for a while, but when I looked back, especially like, the last 15 years when I was doing this, when I started doing this, success was just, in the beginning, getting somebody to pay me to do it.
Yeah.
That was one thing. But now, and there was a period in my life where I was just like, oh, I want to do these big records and do all this. And I was like, I don't really work in that world. I don't know those people. But now I feel like I think about that kind of every week, about like what success is for me. And I think there are large successes that you can have, where it's like a record comes out that you worked on and it gets amazing reviews and the artist starts, like touring more than they ever have, like, which I kind of see is success, that we made that happen. And it's not just all about me.
Right.
But really, like, I'm deep in a bunch of mixing right now. And like day-to-day success is, even in the studio, I guess, is getting that feeling, when somebody's like singing and the take is just this beautiful thing and you get the thing here in the back of the neck and like are on the edge of tears.
Yeah.
Like if I can get that out of somebody and then get that recorded and then feel it again while I'm mixing and then have someone else feel that when it comes out of the speakers, like that's success to me. Like, or like
that.
If somebody's feeling something from listening to the music and not just being like, oh, this is really nice. Oh, what did he play over this chord? Like that doesn't matter to me at all. It like, or not at all, but you know what I'm saying? It's like that's, I look at it as smaller little things, as a chain of like, how can we just keep building up these little successes? That seems like a good life to me.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And it's like the idea of having impact in the streaming world. So many people listen passively, like having 10 million streams doesn't mean that like 10 million people cried to that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And not that everything has to, not that everybody has to cry to everything, but you know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
where you get that feeling. It's like, oh man, like that really hit me. Like,
yeah.
Like there's a Lucy Dacus song that she put out a couple years ago, and I can't listen to it around people because I will just break down. I'm like, man, how did you? It's like you wrote such an amazing song.
Gets you every time.
Like, yeah, every time. Like thinking about it right now, I'm gonna have to grab a tissue in a second.
But
like,
we'll edit around the tears.
No, it'll be like The View or something. I don't know, Barbara Walters style.
I love that definition, that goal. I mean, because it's really, I think the core of why so many people get into this is to, pass that feeling along that you had when you were like listening to music on your Walkman or whatever when you were a kid. Like you just want like one other kid to have that thing to something that you helped put in the world.
Yeah. Like somebody to be like, yeah, like.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
exactly.
Ooh, I don't know. It's somebody to be excited about it. Because I think, that's the whole thing. Exciting a bunch of air. Man, if it comes through the air and makes somebody excited inside, that's amazing. So that's kind of like those are my success goals, my small day-to-days.
I love it. And so basically, carry on to that question is, what is your current biggest goal other than to make people cry? And what is the next smallest step you're going to take to go towards it?
On today's cry list, who are we going to make cry today? So this just got a little flipped on its head because I mentioned before we started recording that I'm going to have to move soon. I've been here for 14 years, living here for 14 years. And during the pandemic, I really got this decked out and set up, even though it looks a little crazy. It's super functional for me. So right now, my next biggest goal is to find a way to work, a place and a way to work where I'm not paying separate rent. And that'll come down the road. I'm not super, super worried about it. But prior to that, to basically like this emergency thinking, my biggest goal, I think, was to kind of like travel around and record people in different locations from different cities and stuff like that. I work with a lot of mostly Chicago artists, but I also have friends all over the country. And every once in a while I get to go do stuff in their towns. And I kind of want to do that a lot more because I love seeing my friends. And I like going to different places and different studios and meeting, new people.
Yeah.
So once I figure out this whole nebulous where my stuff is going to go, that's something I've really been trying to work on the last couple of years, is just like, I'm on a road trip. Oh, there's a studio here. I want to go check it out. Just like meet people from all over the country, And if possible, try to record in those places.
That's where you were just out here in LA doing that, and we got together. Yeah, so that's great. I love it.
Yeah.
Nick, please tell people where they can find you on the internet or whatever you want to share.
Oh, yeah. So I have a website. It's www.nickbroste.com. And the last name is it is Broste. It's like Frosty but with a B. But Broste is the last name. Most people say Broste. So that's my website. And then you can find me on Instagram. I do have a Facebook account. Please don't try to friend me on that. I'm trying to keep it mostly to just friends now. But Instagram is the preferred zone, and I'm just at nbroste there.
Amazing. Awesome. Dude, this is fun. We'll have to do this again. I could keep going, but
Yeah, I understand.
We've all got things we got to do.
Exactly.
Hit me up next time you're out here.
Yes, I will. Hopefully this summer.
One of these days I want to make it back to Chicago. So I enjoyed that city when I was there last. So
it's a good town. And people from LA seem to be moving here, which is starting to scare me a little. So
keep us out.
Well, they usually go the other way.
Yeah.
So
amazing. Awesome, dude. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, man. Thank you. It's great to talk to you.
That's it for this week's episode of Progressions. Thank you so much for watching or listening. Be sure to check out all the links and resources mentioned in the episode down below in the video description or in your podcast show notes. If you're listening to this as an audio podcast, please leave a review on Apple or Spotify. It helps the show so much. And if you're watching on YouTube, feel free to drop any thoughts or questions about the episode down below. Let's keep the conversation going. For those of you watching, you'll be getting a link to another episode you might enjoy popping up somewhere right about now. And for those of you listening, check out the YouTube. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and I will see y'all next time.